Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Open Mind, a community lecture and film series that brings together thought leaders at the intersection of science and culture for meaningful and relevant discussions about mental health issues. The Open Mind is proudly sponsored by UCLA's Friends of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior and the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors. I'm Vicki Goodman, and it is my honor and privilege to introduce today's esteemed discussants. Donna Jackson Nakazawa, award-winning science journalist and author of the best-selling book, Girls on the Brink, Helping Our Daughters Thrive in an Era of Increased Anxiety, Depression, and Social Media, which was named one of the best health books of 2022 by the Washington Post and Mashable. It is also my honor to welcome back to the Open Mind Dr. Artha Gillis, Assistant Clinical Professor in the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at UCLA, who will join Donna in discussion. I'm going to first names now, Donna and Artha. Donna is the author of 7 books, including The Tiny Brain Cell That Changed the Course of Medicine, that was named one of the best books of 2022 by Wired Magazine. Her work that explores the intersection of neurobiology and human emotions has appeared in publications such as Wired, the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, and she has appeared on the Today Show and NPR. Donna is also the creator and founder of the parenting program Growing Strong Girls and the narrative Writing to Heal programs Breaking Free from Trauma and Your Healing Narrative. Dr. Artha Gillis directs the child and adolescent inpatient units at the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital at UCLA. She specializes in evaluating and treating children who have been sexually traumatized and in identifying mental, intellectual, learning, and developmental disabilities in justice-involved youth. Her research focuses on developmental cascades and early intervention after early life adversity. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. Today's program will run for approximately 1 hour, with the last 15 minutes reserved for your questions. If you would like to ask either of our discussants a question, we ask that you please type it into the Q&A that is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We have over 1,700 people registered for today's program, so we ask for your patience as we go through the questions, and we will do our best to get to as many as we can in the time allotted. Today's program is being recorded and will be available for viewing on our YouTube channel, which you can find on our website, friendsofsemelinstitute.org. There you will find a library of videos from past Open Mind programs, videos from WOW, our fundraising event. Also, we just put the page up about the Gen Z Wellness Summit that was held 2 weeks ago, and you can find pictures and videos from that there as well. Please be sure to check out the calendar of upcoming events and special events, including the Open Mind Film Festival for high school students that will be held in person this year on Sunday, April 22nd. And now, let's give a warm Zoom welcome to Donna Jackson Nakazawa and Dr. Artha Gillis. Thank you so much.
Hi, good evening, Donna.
Hi, Artha. It's so great to be here in conversation with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for writing such an important book and calling attention to girls' mental health. I'm curious, what inspired you to write Girls on the Brink, and what do you hope it will accomplish?
Well, as writers, ideas start a little bit before we actually have a book out in the public. And this began for me really around 2018 and 2019. We saw some studies even then that girls were struggling, and 1 in 3 girls was reporting symptoms of major depression, compared to 1 in 10 boys. So we started to see those differences. And I sort of live my life with a bunch of neuroscientist nerds who I interview for a living. And I called a bunch of them, and I was really shocked. And I think maybe the listener will be shocked too, to learn that they were still trying to figure this out, because guess what? Until 2016, neuroscientists only looked at the male brain and how it responds to stress. So researchers were just starting to look at how chronic unrelenting stress affects the male and the female brain differently, kind of like heart disease. If you all are old enough to remember, with heart disease, researchers only looked at the male heart, and it took a while to figure out that our bodies are a little bit different when it comes to big stressors in the environment.
I can definitely attest to that change in 2016. It caused quite an uproar in the research community because they had to start looking at sex as a variable. So definitely that was important that you started to bring this science to light. Now, you begin the book with a very powerful assertion, and it's that our girls are not okay. And I like that you used our girls. But what do you mean by this?
Well, the statistics are pretty stark. I just mentioned that in 2019, 1 in 3 girls were reporting major depression symptoms of major depression. And I don't just mean they didn't feel good. These were 6 or 8 or 10 weeks where they didn't have interest in activity, and they didn't want to get out of bed. They didn't want to see their friends. Fast forward to 2023, and we see that the CDC is reporting 57% of girls feel persistently sad and hopeless. That's a big jump in just a few years. So that's really concerning. And also, girls today are more likely than any other generation of girls, and more likely than boys, to engage in what we call self-derogation. We all know what that's like, right? It's when you can't stop putting yourself down. And we really, really don't want to see that, particularly at this very, very important window during development, as you know better than anybody. The other thing I would say is that I've talked to thousands of girls around the country. They tell me that they feel like their lives today are one endless performance. They are performing to be liked and followed online. They're performing at school, and they are exhausted. And they want us to pay more attention to how they feel inside. Life as a performance is exhausting for anyone. We know that as adults, but it's taking a toll on them at a time that neuroscientists really don't want to see that many big stressors pile up on what is essentially a kid's brain.
Yeah, so those are really staggering numbers. And I mean, I work in child psychiatry, and it's still staggering. I mean, I read your book, and also, we're talking here tonight. I see kids and young adults and our youth day in and day out, and it's still staggering to hear the numbers.
I guess I would really like to know, because you're in the trenches, as we say. I'm interviewing girls all over the country at schools and workshops, but you're there every day and you are seeing what this looks like. So I'm wondering if you could just tell everyone a little bit of what that looks like from your perspective when you walk into work every day.
Well, I can tell you this much, our beds definitely stay full, and there are more girls who present than boys. We take all comers, they come through our emergency department, and I think that's where you really see the crisis or the distress, is that I would call it a crisis of access to resources. I think our pediatricians probably also are overwhelmed, in our school counselors, because those are the places where kids present first when they're in distress, and where our girls present first. And so I think the crisis is more evident at those levels, but we stay full. As soon as we discharge one kid, there are at least 3 in our emergency department waiting for a bed, and sometimes they have to wait longer. I would say too that certain subsets of the population I see are definitely in distress. Our kids and our girls with autism, our gender minority youth, they're especially in distress during these times.
Yeah.
So you give a chronology in your book of society's role in adolescent social engagement. Can you walk us through what's changed in the past several years, so that parents who may be watching and thinking about why it might be harder to relate to what their girls are navigating socially?
Well, these are not the times we grew up in. As all of these psychological stressors have increased, and I know we'll get into social media, but also think of the world out there. Everything's heating up environmentally, climate change, politically, hate crimes. There is this sort of sense of unsafety that kids feel, and they feel it when they're online and they feel it when they're offline. At the same time as these psychological stressors have really mounted and become sort of a 24/7 and very pressing for them. And I didn't even mention school shootings, did I? So, right. So there's a lot going on in the world that's interior and, am I liked, or who's liking me? And do I have to run to Sephora and buy makeup and post about it to be popular? And, am I going to be an influencer? And, oh no, I'm getting a lot of hate from, men and other girls online, to that kind of global pressure. But at the same time, what's really worrisome is that as those pressures have increased, we've really decreased their in real life connection. There's more familial isolation where families are not really part of communities in the way that they once were. A lot of kids told me about something that I came to call the Starling effect, where you kind of feel like every parent is pushing their kid and you don't ever feel like anybody but maybe mom and dad have your back. And that's new, that's different. We know from studies that you need two non-parent adults to have your back. And that's a key sign of flourishing. Community events, and also this generation is spending less time than any other generation face to face with their friends. So it's a really different time.
It absolutely is. I agree with that. And the pandemic definitely didn't help in that regard.
No.
What I heard you describe is several stressors, and not acute stressors like our brain was developed to respond to, but really chronic stress. Could
Yes.
you explain to us why chronic stress might be especially toxic for girls and women?
Well, chronic stress means you never know when the next bad thing is happening. That's how we define it. It's sort of a never ending, and we just don't know when it's going to end. So for girls, and this is really for the science nerds in the room, because it gets a little sciencey, but I think it's worth knowing, because at least what I think is that when we know the science, it gives us a little bit more, okay, I can do this. Like, I know I really need to do this. And when we know what's happening neurobiologically, it's a lot easier to put on your parent's suit and say, like, no, you're actually not going to get a phone when you're 13, right? So bear with me, guys. So we know now that they're actually looking at male and female brains that the female brain processes stress just a little bit differently. And part of this has to do with the fact that at puberty, estrogen comes rushing in. I just want to be clear, I am a huge fan of estrogen. Estrogen is a superpower hormone, right? It like does so many groovy things. It's why women can do as much as men can do just as many hours a day in smaller bodies with smaller organs and still make room for another life. Like, that's amazing, right?
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, when there are a lot of stressors in the environment, estrogen bumps up our response to stress. It kind of ups our stress machinery. It jacks it up in a way that testosterone doesn't. And that's great. Like, it helps protect women against viruses when they're pregnant and all kinds of cool things like that. It's also, unfortunately, the reason why women suffer from autoimmune disease a lot more than men. Because when there are too many toxic stressors in the environment, estrogen gets kind of too jacked up. I could go into that in great detail and fill 5 chalkboards from all the doctors who've explained it to me, but that's the simple take. At the same time, puberty is happening earlier for girls. And I'm sure you see that every day. And as it's happening earlier, unfortunately, estrogen is coming in at a time when we don't really want to see the brain get remodeled, right? Like adolescence, this is another way when you asked, how is adolescence today different than when we were growing up, or, even 30, 20 years ago? Well, we had a few years of adolescence to figure out, well, what does it mean if Jane and Susie don't talk to me at school today? Is this a big problem? Will it be better tomorrow? Or how do I feel? Or how do I ask the adults for help in my environment? All that is really intricate wiring and firing in the brain. But when estrogen comes in early and puberty is happening earlier, those parts of the brain that really know how to analyze thoughts and feelings and distress, they haven't wired and fired up yet. So if you take everything we've talked about, we're increasing stress in the environment. Puberty is happening earlier. This brain remodeling and neural pruning is happening earlier, but before there is the kind of life experience to know how to handle it, or even ask the adults for help, or say, I don't feel good. And on top of all that, we've taken away support systems. It's a lot.
That is a ton. It's a ton. And what I hear you saying is that we need to be more protective, especially of girls, about all of our adolescents during the early adolescent period, pre-adolescent period, but really more protective of girls as the estrogen comes online, as we start to notice that they're developing the physical features of puberty, that not to expect just because they're starting to look like a young woman that they can behave like a young woman, because the stressors are so great. Their brains have not caught up to their body development. And so we need to provide supports around that and be more intentional, because some of the things that seem like resources that were maybe more automatic or built into the environment when we were growing up are not necessarily automatically there. And we need to be more intentional about the supports we provide for girls.
Yes, and that makes me want to ask you a question. And that is that a lot of parents ask me, how do I know the difference? And we know studies show that parents are a little bit overconfident that they'll know how their kids are feeling. But then when it comes down to it and they find out, wow, she was not okay, they're often surprised. So how do you, when parents come to you, when you're sitting with families, how do you help people to understand the difference between, okay, she's coping, these are normal responses to the stressors in her environment, versus not okay, we need more help?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, I would say if you're asking the question internally, it's time to ask someone externally instead of assuming that it's probably normal development, because parents do make that assumption, especially for the oldest daughter or the oldest child. Like, I thought it was just them being a teenager, and they may be comparing them to their friends' children, or hearing similar stories and thinking like this is normal behavior. But if you're asking the question internally, like, is this really normal? It's time to ask someone externally. And by that someone, I mean a pediatrician, a therapist, someone who works with children across many different contexts and can tell you. When I'm sitting with parents, though, I often encourage communication with their child. So I'll ask them, recommend that they ask their child what they think is going on, and if it feels normal, manageable, tolerable for them, and what helps or supports they might need. That's the bigger question, is not normal versus abnormal. Your daughter or someone important in your life that's a young woman is experiencing or expressing some level of distress. So regardless of whether it's normal for teenage years or it's abnormal, she wants help. She wants to be, I heard this from a trainee actually, and I learned a lot from patients and trainees. I'm not above that by any means. And so one of the trainees told me, like, people want to be heard, held, and hugged, the three H's, right?
Yes.
So I would say the person in your life who's experiencing or exhibiting this sort of distress wants to be heard, and they want to be held. They want to know that their big emotions can be contained, that you're not going to run away or punish them for expressing displeasure or what we call negative emotions. And they want to be hugged. They want to feel that affirming touch. And so that's a quick way to, when you're a parent or a trusted adult, to know that, what a young woman or a young man may need.
It's beautiful.
So I was really struck by your description of the potency of communicating through visuals. And this is in the context of social media. So social media usually has a lot of photos, a lot of videos. Can you explain why negative images and videos on social media may be especially impactful on the developing brain?
Yes, I always tell parents that a kid's brain on social media looks like a lot like ours when we think about winning the lottery, right? It's the same reward circuitry gets activated, or maybe you're thinking about that piece of chocolate cake, right after we get off the Zoom, or whatever it is for you. Those same reward circuits get going. And over time, when kids see a lot of things online that are what we call high health risk behaviors, right? People doing inappropriate things at inappropriate ages that are not safe for their health and well-being. When they see those repeated, it starts to turn off areas in that prefrontal cortex that we want to see wire and fire up for good decision making. It starts to turn off some of what researchers call those decision-making good filters, right? So think of it like a good filter system. Those filters are not there. And you know what that means? It means the kids become more likely to say at dinner, oh, I would never have 3 beers at this party like Jana did 2 weeks ago. I would never do that. And then go right out and do it. Not so much because everyone is doing it at the party. That's always been hard enough. But because she has watched thousands and thousands of videos on TikTok of kids chugging beer at parties. I'm using that as an example. There are a lot of other behaviors we could put in and stand in for that. But here's also something that really surprised me in the research. Images, videos are clocked by the brain 60,000 times faster than the written word.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
So not only is the filter being turned off, the brain doesn't really filter images. And I think we all know that. Anyone who watched 9/11 knows it was only 1 second into that when you turned on your TV. Back then, we weren't walking around with our smartphones. But if you're old enough to have lived through that, you can appreciate that on a visceral level for your child and kind of take it with everything we've been saying about the brain at this time in development. We really don't want to see that. And again, I think some of the science can help parents pull back a little bit and really start to put up a few more guardrails. And also, I just love what you said a minute ago, have more of these really important conversations.
Yeah, that was a really powerful example. When you brought up 9/11, I did live through that. And the image immediately came to my mind. And so, I think about how when kids see images on social media, how much easier it is for the brain to recall those things than if those same things were written in words. And so we didn't experience 9/11 by reading about it. We saw it. Even if you were thousands of miles away, you saw it. And so your brain can quickly bring up that image.
Right.
I think faster than if we had read about it and not seen any images of it. So that was a really great example of how sticky images and videos that young people see on social media can stick with them and influence their decision making, because we know that their frontal lobes don't develop as quickly as the emotional parts of their brain. And so they're at a, I don't want to call it a disadvantage, because there's so many beautiful things about adolescence that I think we can highlight. But parents really need to be aware that social media is not just a way, I think, of socializing with peers, much like we socialize in person. They use their phones and their devices and social media, to connect with people. It's much more powerful than that. And so it does need to be properly supervised. So my next question I'm curious about is, we know that our young women and young men are going to make mistakes. I don't know that what we're suggesting and what you suggest in your book is that we just allow girls to express things that might be harmful for other girls in just any kind of situation. How should parents balance providing an emotional safe space for their daughter to discuss stress while holding them accountable for their involvement in behaviors that are toxic to other girls?
Yes, you know, this is something we're hearing an awful lot about when we open up this free comment section of life, which is really what social media is. We're opening up, I don't know if listeners, viewers heard about this, but you know, moms on Instagram run influencer accounts for their 7 and 8 and 9-year-old girls. And it turns out there are 500,000 sexual predators who follow those accounts and put a lot of uncomfortable messages in those comments, and parents are now realizing, well, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. I think it's a terrible idea. Please don't do it. Please don't run an influencer account for your child, please. There are so many different ways in which children later do not like that. But to your question, it also opens up, if it's free comment period 24/7, and we know just a few weeks ago, new research came out showing that kids are on their phones almost all the time. It was like 4 hours a day, then 5, then 6, and now all the time. It opens up the opportunity for more criticism, not just misogyny from men and boys. And let's be clear, girls receive many more negative, derisive, critical comments about their face, body, skin, behavior, body shape, exponentially than men. But because we have created scarcity around social media, only so many people can be successful influencers at 14 as they race out to Sephora to buy Drunk Elephant products and post about it. We are creating more scarcity with more open comments. And this means more girls piling on other girls. So I hear a lot about this at schools, right? And kids will say things to me like, you know, it's just not safe out there. I just don't feel safe. You know, I don't feel safe going online, but I can't not go online. I can't not be part of these discussions. So again, going back to something really lovely that you said earlier, it's these conversations we have with our kids that are really at the center of everything we're discussing. When we really create that deep sense of parent-child attunement, we can start to have conversations about these things. And research shows us that the chance of a teen flourishing is 12 times higher when a teen feels they can turn to a parent with anything, no matter how hard, right? That is research out of Johns Hopkins. But a lot of the girls I talk to, and again, I've talked to thousands of girls, they don't really feel right now like they can go to their parents with anything. This is not because parents are doing a terrible job. It's that we haven't really caught up to the fact that they are this stressed out and that childhood is so radically different. So please, please don't beat up on yourselves. I'm a mom of a daughter and a son. We are doing our absolute best. We love our kids more than anything in the whole entire world. Parents tell me that every day, but our kids aren't feeling it. They don't feel it. They feel like it's a pressure cooker. They're there for the performance, for the accolades, for the being better than the next kid. And they also feel like we really are too stressed out to help them. They tell me that all the time.
Wow.
My mom is so stressed out. If I go to her with this, she's going to stress her out more. I don't want to do that. Or I told my dad, and he said, oh, don't be weak. Like, you know, our conversation is not progressing for the times. And when we create that parent-child attunement, when our kid feels safe coming to us with anything, when we make it a good experience for them, they can start to spill and talk about what life is like for them online, or we can ask these very important questions around what's happening on social media. But they have to trust us first. And that means we can't be jumping in as the detective or the fixer, you know, well, who did that? Well, who posted it? Well, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to call the school. We have to be there with the language that is neuroprotective and sends them the message that, as you said, they are hugged, right? And they are heard. And there's some really great ways that we can go about doing this. But I think that we have to help them navigate this era including how girls pile up on girls, because I am hearing that a lot.
That was an awesome response. I mean, it definitely resonated with a lot of what you said, including parents really do want to see their kids flourish, their daughters, their sons equally. And it sounds like a really, we won't call it easy to kind of operationalize or act out, is listening, right? They want to feel heard. They need to have a trusted adult to go to. And that it's hard as parents to just stay curious a little bit longer without jumping to investigation or responding to your own angst of what could happen, to not to interfere with your child's flourishing. Because parents' brains are wired a certain way too. After you have kids, you're thinking about danger and all the ways your kids could, get into trouble. And so it's hard to stay curious a little bit longer, but it sounds like it would be helpful for parents to see, have questions about how their kid would respond or how they process the information they're seeing in social media, and show that they care about what's going on in their kids' world.
And one sentence that young people really love is when we just start a conversation by saying, you know what, I'm just going to be a good listener. I'm not going to say a single word until I know that you're finished. And even when kids jump in and they go, well, what do you think? Because they're so used to you jumping in, they want to circumvent that moment, right? Just say, hey, I promise I'll tell you what I think if you want to hear, but what you think is so much more important to me. And I really just want to sit here and listen to that and just let it happen. And studies show that when you are a listener and you don't ask a single question, kids spill more. I know it seems counterintuitive because when they were little, it's like, well, did you skin your knee? Or what about your homework? We're kind of ushering them into this, more grown-up phase of life. But here's what's cool about stepping back is that they're more likely to report that they feel you're a cheerleader, like you're on their side, because you're not evaluating, you're not finger wagging, you're not judging. And they're also more likely to feel that they can come to you the next time when the stakes might be a lot bigger. And it's also neuroprotective. What did we say earlier? Puberty is happening earlier with more and more stressors. We have a job, which is to help them build that neural circuitry. We want them to fire and wire up for resiliency. And the best way we can do that is not try to fix everything. Let their brain figure out the wobble, right? While we're right there next to them. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's reinforcing too. It's going to feel awkward for parents at first. They're going to want to jump in. But as they show their daughters, their sons that they are great listeners, it reinforces their child coming to them, which reinforces the listening and increases that parent-child attunement you've been talking about. I am so eager to ask you a question about an account in your book of a girl being hospitalized after a breakup, which I see commonly. And in your book, you talk about her reflection that she wanted to break up with herself.
Yes.
This was such a powerful account of what I see. I see this angst of not so much focus on the person they broke up with or even feeling rejected, but really feeling uncomfortable themselves. But can you say more about what girls mean when they want to break up with themselves and how society has changed such that girls may feel this way?
Part of it, when I'm talking to girls, has a lot to do with one thing, and that is that we have blurred the lines between childhood and adult female sexuality and adult sexuality in general. And girls are feeling really uncomfortable with it. They'll tell me, I just wanted to be a kid a little bit longer, or, my breasts developed at 10 or 11 and boys just treated me totally differently. And older boys were, trying to kiss me on the, behind the school building. And they come to feel that nothing is of value in them in our society except this way of being seen as a grown adult sexual being when they're still children. So social media has really ramped that up. But when I listen to the despair going on for many of the girls that I talk to, it is interwoven with this early sexualization, this feeling that there are a combination of body parts that, have to be just so, or an expectation to grow up faster, or, oh my God, you're 11, but you look 16, this sort of let's hurry it up, folks. And I think that when I sit back and think about it, of course, it's the school pressure. Of course, it's, whether or not they feel really connected to parents. But a lot of it is that on social media and the media in general, there's no line, there's no distinction between being an 8-year-old girl and a 22-year-old woman in terms of what we start to turn on them in terms of that external gaze and that misogynistic gaze. It's really hurting them. And so I think that's really a big part of it. And it's another good reason to sort of step back and begin to look at how we're letting culture come in very early and very quickly in girls' lives.
Yeah, that was really powerful. We've been talking about how puberty starts earlier, and so these physical changes are starting when girls are younger. And as you spoke, I thought about, does a 10, 11, 12-year-old girl, is she really ready for people to start looking at her body and evaluating and even saying things that they think are complimentary that are not, that are uncomfortable for her? That just, because of society and kind of the way things go, and especially with social media, I can imagine that's a huge stressor for a young girl to deal with, and for several years to develop a strategy around that or a narrative around that.
Yeah, and I wonder when you see it from your perspective, we talk a lot, now about factors for flourishing and, positive experiences that girls can have. How would you flip that for parents so that they can make sure that they're not doing that to their kids? Because you're an adolescent psychiatrist, like, you're looking at the body and the brain and in the context of the family. Like, what are some ways that parents can flip that around and make sure that they're not doing that?
Well, it all goes back to listening, right? Not every girl is different, and not every girl is going to be bothered by certain things. We should think about it in the broader context of society and how we change things, but on a very individual level. If I'm talking to parents, I really want them to hear their daughter and and empower her to speak about what's uncomfortable for her in parents' language, other people's language, so that she can find her voice. That's an important skill as she's growing up. And so it's important for parents to hear from their daughters what's hard for them, and develop supports around that. It reminds me too, is connected to this concept you frame in your book called the missing years. This critical period when our young women, well, all of our young people are forming their identities in multiple areas. So physically, emotionally, socially, mentally, in terms of their personality. Should we be being more protective of adolescents, and especially adolescent girls during this period?
I think that we want to make sure that we aren't racing them to the mall to pick out a bra at 7 if they don't need it. And we aren't running influencer accounts for them when they're 5. And that we're also having those really hard conversations around social media, because a lot of this early sexualization occurs once you open up the whole wide world, right? Some of it is going to be out there in the environment. Some of it is that sexist uncle who's like, you're watching basketball and he's like, oh, she'd look better in a mini skirt than that. Hey, we have to be able to stand up to that. We have to be able to model it for our daughters in particular. We have to model it for our sons. We have to, hey, that's not funny, nor is it true. Oh, you're being sensitive. Hey, that's something that people say when they're being insensitive. Like, you have to give it back. And studies show that when we do this in front of our daughters, they're more likely to hold their own when they meet that guy right, at a party and so on and so forth. So that's one of the things that I really encourage families to do differently. And girls love to see their moms stand up to sexist comments, right? Like you're walking across the street and they're honking the horns and shouting. You're like, we're women, not a traffic jam. Cut it out. You know, they love to see that. But also, we really have to talk about social media now, don't we? Like we
do.
we have to. It's difficult. And one of the first things that I hear from kids all over the country, and they write me these little Post-it notes about what they wish their parents would do differently, and they're anonymous. And I get hundreds of these up at my lectern. And one of the things I hear over and over is, I just wish my dad would put his phone down. Well, my mom is always on her phone. And so it's kind of like smoking, folks. You cannot raise your kids not to smoke if you've always got a cigarette dangling out of your mouth. You just can't do it. You can't do it. So the other thing we really have to be careful of is that we want to make sure that we're teaching social media literacy. Think about it. We're raising kids. We keep saying it. We want their brain to fire and wire up for critical thinking. We do it when they look at history and literature. Most families never have a conversation around social media use. I've heard this from pediatricians time and time again. They feel like they're the ones pulling families in to have this conversation. I'm sure you can relate to that.
Absolutely.
And so we've got to have it. And what kids respect is if we put limits on our phone use, and if we also walk up to the discomfort that we all feel when we put our phones away. We're not telling them, you do this, you do that. Uncomfortable for all of us. Phones have crept into our lives and they have taken over our family time. Kids spill their real feelings over meals, right before bed, in the car, but they don't do it when there are devices. They don't do it. And we want them to spill because what you've been talking about and I've been talking about is that parent-child attunement is that key factor for flourishing. So the other thing I like to tell families is we've really got to kick in young people's sense of social justice, because here's what works. When you ask them to go inside and assess how they feel when they've been scrolling, which really is a lot of despair, not being good enough, not being, compared to other people negatively, or angry or superior. If you are having big feelings, which algorithms push you to have, that's how they work, you're being played, and someone is making a lot of money out of your big feelings. So sometimes when we can have those conversations with young people, they start to say, I don't want to get played. I don't want to make money for these people, but we have to really activate that inside of them. It can't just be an outside do this, do that, while we're doing the opposite.
That was awesome. I know we're going to turn to some audience questions now, but I want to highlight that teaching your kids to pay attention to how they feel when they're on social media is an important skill to teach as they, go through adolescence and emerge into adulthood, because that's what's going to be helpful as they make decisions about how they engage with social media and other things that they're involved in. So really want to highlight that.
Yes.
Donna and Artha, thank you so much. This has been the most fascinating and enlightening conversation. I feel like you have given us so much information to unpack, and for all the parents that are listening to incorporate into their parenting, into their daily lives. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. This has really been an incredible conversation. We do have a lot of questions. I'm going to just start by, there's several about examples of neurosupportive language. Can you give some examples? And there's I think 4 questions about that. So enlighten us, please. How do we start?
I can jump in on that. So I talk to parents a lot about that. And again, starting that conversation with something that admits that even you are not perfect. Like, hey, some conversations are tough to walk up to, right? Like some topics. It's difficult even for me to have a conversation about this, but we don't want to sweep things under the rug. Like opening up the umbrella so that anything is possible in that conversation. As Artha said, being a good listener, but also evaluating your own nervous system before you have that conversation. Kids borrow their neurobiology from us, right? Like they literally are mirror neurons in the brain. Kids will pattern off of how deeply we're breathing. How high is our heart rate? You want to make sure before you go in a conversation that you have the lowest heart rate in the room. You want to be validating, right? Kids tell me their parents don't validate them. They invalidate their feelings all the time. What does validation look like? That sounds really hard. Anyone in your shoes would feel the way you do. Again, stay away from finger wagging and evaluation. Make sure that you're giving a compliment if you say anything. Wow, you dealt with that really difficult situation well. Again, promise to be a good listener. If they ask you for feedback, tell them you want to give it to them, but you'll wait just a minute until you hear more. Make sure that you exit the conversation before you're really ready to leave it so that you don't go blah, blah, blah when you didn't intend to. And I always tell parents, thank them for talking to you. Tell them, hey, this really meant a lot to me. If you say the wrong thing, great science shows us the quicker you apologize, the faster that they will forget all about it. So those are just some of the neuroprotective tips for talking to kids about tough things.
Thank you. Artha, do you want to add anything to that?
Just to highlight that what Donna said, that we know that positive reinforcement is much stickier and more effective than negative reinforcement and punishment. So as you're listening, if there are things you legitimately want to reinforce and them to do again, you praise it. And you can focus on that aspect of it to reinforce their ability to manage their emotions and handle problems as they emerge into adulthood.
And they will really appreciate it and remember it and be more likely to come back to you next time.
Thank you. Great answers and very helpful. There are a couple of just statistic questions that people are asking that they didn't quite catch. Artha, I think you're the one that said girls need to be heard, hugged, and what was
Held.
held.
Yes, like held isn't contained. Like they want to know that their big emotions are okay. I think in society, we often maybe inadvertently give the message that it's not okay for women to show certain emotions or to have bigger emotions. We always have to be so composed and everything. At home, if they have to perform just like they do in public, then they don't have a space that's safe for that. And so girls, all of us, we have human needs. We want to be heard, held, and hugged.
Love that.
That's so important and so basic and something it's good for all of us to hear. So thank you for restating that. One of our listeners is asking that didn't quite catch the percentage from the Johns Hopkins study about the greater chance of a teen flourishing when they feel they can talk with their parents.
Yeah, so this study comes out of Johns Hopkins, out of the the Bloomberg School of Public Health. The research is by Christina Bethel, if you want to look it up. And she found that the number one factor for teen flourishing was feeling that you could turn to a parent or caregiver. I mean, it could be grandma, right? It could be some really strong, caregiving figure in your life. Not everything is on parents, right? If your kids don't want to talk to you, then try to make sure they have people that they do feel comfortable talking to. It doesn't have to be a parent. And that when she looked at all these different factors of flourishing, kids who answered yes to that question were 12 times more likely to meet the criteria for flourishing in adulthood. So that just goes back to everything we've been saying, that being able to have those deep conversations in which you feel held, in which you feel that your emotions are safe, what we call psychological safety. You can express anything without fear of retaliation or being judged. That's what we're going for here.
Thank you. Thank you. One of our listeners is asking if you have tips for how to listen. I know you've talked a lot about the importance of listening, but sometimes, and this listener is saying their young woman communicates via text. So how do you bring that? Because we have noticed that a lot of the kids now communicate via text rather than talking person to person. How do you encourage actually conversations in person, and what are tips for good listening?
I'm going to give that to Artha, because Artha, how do you, if you know that you want to approach something sensitive with your child and they don't want to be in the same room with you and they just text you, I'm just imagining here, like, yes, I'm hungry, are there snacks, whatever. How would you approach that sensitively?
Yeah, I'll give you some great advice that I've shared with parents. I got this from a supervisor when I was in training. Do it in the car. So it's hard to have conversations when you're looking at someone, and so your gaze might be uncomfortable for your child. They may see micro expressions that you don't even realize you're making, and you may not be thinking those thoughts, but they are watching you closely. When you're facing the same way, so it could be on a car ride, just the two of you. It could be they're in the back seat, you're in the front seat. You're going for a walk. Things like that, where you don't have to look at each other, are more perfect environments, or more ideal, we shall say, environments conducive to talking and getting your kid to open up, and making that a practice, a regular practice, to go on a walk or a car ride. Maybe you're going to take them for some special time. Each parent should have special time with each child, alone time. And so doing it at those times, but not facing each other, is a lot easier for both of you.
Interesting.
I love that. I'll just throw in that a fellow author has a tip where she says, try to have Botox brow, where it's like you're not showing any micro expression because they've been reading that since they were born, and you think you can get away with it. Like, you're really worrying, but you're saying something super positive. Doesn't work. They know.
Yeah, that's true. I would add too, they asked about how to listen. So active listening, you can Google active listening. You want to make sure you don't have distractions yourself. All of us are aware when someone is a distracted listener, and so they're not going to open up if you're distracted. So making sure it's at a time when you can give your full attention, your own devices are away, and you listen, you ask curious questions to get more information, you summarize periodically what you've heard so they can clarify and correct any misunderstandings. Are keys to active listening. And if it's appropriate and comfortable, you make direct eye contact so they can see that you're listening as well.
And another little tip that can really help parents is, really try to imagine that your heart is open, that you're listening with your heart. Again, as Artha said, maybe they don't like eye contact so much, but don't feel it. Sometimes kids are like, she's staring at me, trying to make this connection. And we want to feel it here. It's not so much what we wear on our face, it's what we feel. And again, that goes down to mirror biology. They know what we're feeling. We can't really keep it a secret if we're secretly waiting to jump in and find out, like, who did send that text. We have to be listening with the heart first. And it can help to just imagine that your heart is connecting with your child's, and everything will come from there.
Thank you. Very, very wise advice. Question here about the loneliness epidemic that our Surgeon General has talked about. And what about our girls and their feelings of loneliness and their feelings of disconnection? And, we just had 2 weeks ago, we just had a Gen Z wellness summit where all the conversations were about Gen Z's issues like social media, like anxiety and depression. But we asked our Teen Advisory Council for a slogan for this event, and their slogan was, "We're all in this together." Connection, connection, connection. They want connection. And yet they're so connected on their devices, and yet they're the loneliest generation.
Well,
So,
the opposite of trauma is connection, but it isn't online connection. So if we're saying there are a lot of traumas in the environment for young people today, girls and boys, the opposite of that is connection in real life. So we have to be thinking about ways we can bring more in real life interaction into our kids' lives. We want to make sure that we're setting them up for mentors. Now, I've interviewed, I don't know how many thousands of people in my life as a science journalist, but I will tell you there's a point in everybody's story, if they suffered during their adolescence or young adulthood, in which they talk about that one person who saw them. And maybe it was someone they spent relatively little short periods of time with. You know, maybe it was a school counselor who told them they were really good at poetry. Or one girl told me about a neighbor who used to invite her to bake bread on Friday afternoons. It could be going to see your grandmother more often. We sync up to well-being in real life, not online. It doesn't happen, people. It does not happen. We get a dopamine hit, like winning the lottery. Wow, yay, I'm in the group chat. Everybody thinks what I said was funny. But we don't wire up for connection, and we don't get oxytocin, which is really that feel-good protective hormone. So we want to make sure, hey, if our kid is interested in photography, maybe we have a friend who's interested in photography and she could hang with her from time to time. Maybe she's interested in filmmaking and she can sign up for a filmmaking, group or club, or she likes to code. There are programs running at the Pentagon for girls who code. We want to put girls in environments where they are growing and learning with autonomy in person. So Artha, I'm sure you have a lot to add to that.
I'll just add a little bit because I know we have a lot of questions and we're running short on time, is that it's low-hanging fruit. Like, you have connection, the opportunities for connection inside your home. We have to put down our own cell phones, start to reconnect with each other. And don't forget to encourage your teams, your teen girls in particular, to connect in person with each other and not just be on their cell phones all the time, connecting online, like you said, Donna. And so encouraging them to have in-person, kind of having people over. Like, remember that old thing we used to do, have friends over? Doing that, and even highlighting after they've had people over, if they've gone over someone else's house, to say, you seem really happy, or really highlight how they're engaging and how they feel after those encounters, and help them realize how they may be feeling when they're only online, or when they're online too much, so they know how to titrate that as they emerge into adulthood.
thank you. There are several people asking about resources. What resources would you recommend? I know we're starting to run low on, we're actually out of time, but it's important that they have some resources.
I'm going to give that to Artha because she's living right in the midst of resources. She is a resource, of course.
Well, I was hoping you would add, some non-mental health resources, because I don't want to pathologize this developmental period. So I can definitely say, start with your pediatrician. They're easier to access. Start with therapy, individual, your own as parents, couples, family. Don't be shy about those things. And, don't feel like you have to have so much pressure to be a perfect parent. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be good enough. And so lowering the kind of standards for how you're going to show up as parents will allow you to show up more for your kids in a way that's helpful for them. But Donna, I'm hoping you have resources that are outside of mental health for parents.
Well, I think I'm going to surprise people, but not you, Artha, when I say that we often see that one of the most helpful things for kids and teens is when you reflect on your own story of adversity and your own story of trauma. We have very, very, very good evidence. I know Artha has worked in this area for a long time. I have as well, about how our own early life or youth adversity, or even as a young adult, affects us dramatically in how we wire and fire up for parenting, right? And so to sort of turn that lens on ourselves a little bit as a way to know that we'll be better poised to help our kids. When we look at our own story, we can turn whatever pain we experienced into something else, kind of wisdom that extends that possibility for that parent-child attunement. And that's really important work. It's different for everybody, but it allows us to do something critical. And that is, instead of say, well, why is my kid behaving like this? And be ready for that reaction and getting very reactive, going, okay, why am I getting triggered by this? Why is this so hard for me? And what do I need to be doing about it so I can be that kind of parent that we've been talking about being tonight? That is your number one resource, to look at your own story and your own reactivity and your own behavior with self-compassion. Because I know you're already working really hard to raise a wonderful family.
Thank you. And the self-compassion, that's a very important piece of advice, because we are very hard on ourselves, and everybody wants to be the perfect parent or the perfect grandparent. And sometimes we misfire too. And I loved what you said, apologize for your mistakes. They'll be accepting of it, rather than just being defensive. We are one more question, which I'm also very curious about, and about when you talk about girls piling up on girls. Can you explain?
Well, Artha, what do you see from your perspective? Because you
That-
brought that up.
Right. So what I see is that girls are really raised in a society that is hard on girls and women, and they learn to do it to each other. A lot of the stories are not so much about what a man or a boy has done, but how some other girl has rejected them or really gone in on them on social media, excluded them. So that's what I mean. That's what I meant when I asked the question. And that's what I've seen. It's really tough for girls.
Very.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really helps girls is when we help them to discern their values for how they treat other people in person and online. And when we start to talk to them about what that looks like. And again, we've talked a lot about helping girls and all young people to go inside and assess their feelings and their nervous system, and to really learn to assess, like, what are those values for me in terms of how I relate to others and how I relate to myself. So we really want to be working on that. Again, social media has amplified all these things on steroids very quickly. And it's okay if we're still catching up to some of these problems and addressing them now. Now is okay. Start where you are.
Thank you. Well, I'm sorry that we can't get to all these great questions, but thank you for this incredible presentation. And I think you've helped a lot of people with your wise words of wisdom. Thank you all for the privilege of your time. We look forward to seeing you back here on Tuesday, March 12th. And this is actually a good segue. This program on March 12th is about helping kids choose kindness. And so it really goes hand in hand with what we've been talking about today: kindness toward each other, kindness toward our daughters. And so I hope that you'll all tune in for that. And thank you just for this really impactful conversation. Donna, Artha, we're very grateful to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
It was incredible. Thank you. Thank you both for the time that you took to prepare and for taking the time for this conversation. Very, very meaningful and relevant. So good night, everyone. Stay safe, stay well. Please come back to the next Open Mind, and good night.